Kevin asks if he can touch in an 8-foot pool. Kevin 2 mocks 1 for thinking he could touch in a 3-foot pool. Both are over 6 feet tall. By Red-Stilleto. I worked at a lifeguard as my university pool. Only students can swim, so these. Kevin 1 Yo lifeguard. How deep is the pool? Me Most of the pool is 8 feet deep. The shallow end is 3 feet and the deep is 9 feet, but this long stretch in the middle is all 8 feet. Kevin 1 Can I touch in that? Me in 8 feet of water? Kevin 1 Yeah. I paused to look at him to see if he was trying to be funny and he looked serious. Me Well, how tall are you? Kevin 1 6'1". Me stares at Kevin. Kevin 1 stares back at me. I lose the staring contest because I have to look back at the pool. I listen to both Kevins talk it out and think out loud for a few minutes until they come back. Kevin 1 So can I touch in 8 feet? Me No you cannot touch in 8 feet. Can you swim? Kevin 1 Yeah I'm a great swimmer, thanks lifeguard. He cannonballs into the pool while his friend watches. I watch him and yes he seems to be able to swim. The friend joins and they swim for a few minutes before getting tired. Kevin 1 Let's go to the 3-foot area so we can touch. Kevin 2 Ha you're such a moron. First you have to ask the lady if you can touch in 8 feet of water and now you think you can touch in 3? Geez, I don't know why I'm friends with you, you're such an idiot. Kevin 1 swam to the shallows and stood up and they both looked confused. They left shortly after. I'm not sure how they got accepted to the school, and I might have assumed maybe they didn't know the imperial system and relied on metric, but he told me his height in feet. Even if he didn't know imperial he should know 8 is bigger than 6 and 3 is less than 6. Hope you enjoyed and I'm glad he didn't drown cause I'm not sure he would wake up and remember how to breath.
Kevin Eats Raw Chicken by DoctorDont. My brother is a Kevin. Let me tell you the story. One day while we were on holiday in Australia, you know the place that doesn't exist, Smile, and Kevin decides that he wants to have a midnight snack, so he gets up and gets a cold chicken tendy out of the fridge, but the problem was that unlike most chicken tenders they were raw, so he takes his first bite and it has the texture of jelly and it does not taste good, so he take 2 more bites before thinking maybe this is raw and puts it in the trash before going to bed and not telling anyone. The next day we went to Movie World where he had 4 diarrhea attacks, then came out completely fine because apparently the raw chicken went right through him. Moral of the story, my brother has a brick for a stomach. I'm writing on my phone so I'm sorry for any mistakes.
Kevin almost ruined school for me by 710,733. I only found this sub yesterday, but reading some of the stories here make me think of a Kevin from my own life. This guy was a real Kevine, so much so that the word Kevin became pretty much synonymous with the sort of bullshit he did. Though our school wasn't in an exactly awful area, it had a fairly wide catchment, meaning kids came from all sorts of backgrounds, but there was still this sort of community feel to the whole place, which was nice, albeit a bit suffocating at times. Kevin wasn't from this community, but came into it as a newcomer in Year 7, 6th grade, the start of middle school, for all you Americans, and boy did he make a first impression. On his first day, the guy who had clearly been the popular kid at his last school, we'll call him PB, and already had, you know, friends and social standing, was pretty nice to Kevin, offered to hang out with him and such. This was unusual for most of the kids in the area. Kevin brushed him off very rudely, which instantly made him a bit of an outcast. In one of his first lessons, Kevin was dicking about in the back of the class, and the teacher rightly called him to task for it, and then quizzed him on the induction reading we had all been given. Kevin knew literally nothing, but was still a snarky little shit about it. After this, Kevin ends up hanging around with this scrawny little shit from an enormous family of other scrawny shits that bred like flies. We're talking borderline chav, other than the fact they didn't live on a 60s brutalist council estate. A guy I knew, who knew this kid whom we shall now refer to as Kevin 2's brother, said their house was an absolute mess, crap everywhere. Both parents were routine hoarders, which explains why this guy wore a uniform that looked like it had been dragged backwards through a cat. So not a great start for Kevin. Kevin was constantly getting in trouble, usually for fights. Being the social outcasts, people, especially PB, would tease both Kevin 1 and Kevin 2, so they had a few scraps because fighting is a better way of resolving your problems, apparently. A couple of my favorites were, 1, PB called him a harmless name. Kevin tried to attack him, missed, and hit his friend Kelly, who for some reason started to hang out with him and Kevin 2 even after realizing the two were mentally deficient. I think the two of them gave her collateral brain damage with their very presence, in the face instead. Apparently she needed dental work after that. 2. Kevin and PB got in another fight in year 12, where Kevin messed up PB pretty badly. He apparently didn't know how he could have done that when teachers found out. Great defense, you fucking idiot. Talking of year 12, none of us are sure how Kevin got there. Kevin 2 had shitloads of siblings to basically tell him how to answer the questions, and Kaylee was actually good at schoolwork. Not Kevin. I don't think we ever saw him study once, at all. In my last year 11 exam, one I sadly shared with him, he came in looking exhausted, bags under the eyes, pale skin, the works. Anyway, Kevin fell asleep. In the exam. Our moderators were kinda useless, so didn't do anything, until Kevin started having a nightmare. The asshole was the row over from me, and it was really distracting, but the school didn't really care when I made an appeal for extenuating circumstances because I was set to pass anyway. Somehow, even after all that, Kevin made it to 6th form. Sigh. About a year before this, the council forced a new head teacher on the school, since the friendly old man who'd been there before was about as useless as a chocolate teapot. I don't think he ever disciplined anyone, at all. And you just know who the council put in place, an absolutely grades-obsessed, twee matron of a woman. She wasn't popular, but we bared with it because she was basically our only chance of ever passing school. Did I mention she hated Kevin's sort? Oh, yes. Kevin made himself a target by correcting the teacher on something, I forget what, in a lesson, which at some point became an argument about politics between the two. Kevin evidently didn't learn his lesson from the detention as he loudly criticized the teacher from the first bullet point on his teaching style in front of the whole class a year later. More detention was had. To be fair to Kevin though, both teachers in this case were assholes, and had it out for him pretty much since day one. This doesn't however, excuse the club that he, Kevin 2 and Kelly made, which seemed to just be about how bad these teachers were. I cringe that a number of other people I knew actually joined it. The school got wind of it, and promptly shut it down. We didn't see some of them for a few days after that. Presumably suspensions were had. Despite being rude to teachers in front of them, and slagging teachers off to other teachers, because teachers don't ever talk to each other, there were a few teachers who actually quite liked Kevin. This may have been because, for all his social awkwardness and ineptitude, Kevin was good at sports, one of the only things our school really had going for us. We had a friendly competition with some of our link schools, and though it was only year 11s, 12s and 13s that were meant to be involved, Kevin somehow managed to wrangle his way onto the team as a year 9 through this favoritism. The year 11s in particular were unimpressed. We in year 9 hated the fact that he was a favorite of some of the more important teachers. Beatings may have been had. Early on, the two Kevins and Kelly managed to sneak a lizard into school and keep it as a pet in the caretaker's storage space. Teachers found out, and they seemed surprised to be in trouble. One fateful night, Kevin and Kevin 2 decided, for whatever reason, to go joyriding in Kevin 2's dad's car. Since the two of them were short and scrawny at this stage, I don't even know how they operated it properly. Like most British cars, it was a manual. After some fun and games, they managed to crash it. On school grounds. Their excuse was something along the lines of we couldn't park it. I did kinda feel a bit sorry for Kevin, as there was some dark shit around him. A family member of his who had served time for some really rough offenses, murders and the like, got out of prison, and Kevin 2 and Kaylee were absolutely paranoid that he was going to try to kill Kevin. Kevin was absolutely unfettered by the whole thing, until stuff around school starting going missing or getting broken. Then he started freaking out too. We all thought it was hilarious though, and since then, when something a bit mysterious happens, it's always Kevin's psycho uncle. We didn't see Kevin Turk-Ellie in year 13, at all. No big deal, sometimes sixth form isn't for some people, dropouts happen etc. It was actually quite nice, as it meant we could get on with our work for once without Kevin's bullshit. What we didn't know is that they had somehow managed to get on the wrong side of a particularly nasty gang, who probably had ties with the EDL, that's the British equivalent to the Ku Klux Klan, an openly aggressive racist bunch at the very least, who are usually able to evade the police, a law unto themselves really. So, trying to avoid this lot, the three decide to hide out in our school. Honestly, I don't think I'll forget that day. The gang found them. Huge amount of damage to the school. Some kids got caught in the crossfire too. Eventually it ended. Apparently Kevin had been killed by the gang leader, who brought his body around to parade his victory. But no, Kevin had survived the fatal blow, and went on to fight back. At this point, Neville beheaded Nagini, the final Horcrux, and Voldemort could finally be killed, and that was the end of that. The moral of the story is that some Kevins ultimately get to bang their best mate's hot redhead sister.
You are going to miss your flight by Sakura_Leviathan. Sorry for the long post. On mobile, so please excuse the mistakes. I think this comes into the Kevin category, however, if it doesn't I will find another place to put it in. New to Reddit, so if you could guide me to the place that would be great, Dia. Some backstory: I am a European expat living in the Middle East, have done so of my life. My dad wanted to retire to a country in Asia and had bought a house there. The house is approximately 3 hours away from the airport, this is important, and in a valley surrounded by fields. There is a main road and some other housing compounds around, but there is a fair distance between them. The main town is a 5-minute drive away and very easy to get a tuk-tuk to come and get you. Now, anyone who travels extensively knows that you should get travel insurance, not just for medical emergencies, but also in case your luggage gets stolen/damaged, death, God forbid, but also in case you miss your flight, etc. Also very important. We are pretty close to the family from my mom's side, and when someone asks if they can use the house in Asia for their holiday, the answer is usually yes, provided that they leave it clean when they depart. Normally, they fly from Europe to the Middle East, stay for a couple of days before flying over to Asia for their holiday, and then back to the Middle East for a few days before going home. On with the story. One of my cousins, let's call her Dana, and her boyfriend, who shall be referred to as Kevin, asked if they could stay at the house for 10 days. It so happened that I was going to be in Asia on holiday around the same time, though I would arrive before they do and depart before they do, but had a few overlapping days. I had not met Kevin before. My mum had a few times and said that he was not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he is Dana's boyfriend and she loves him, so for the sake of keeping the peace in the family we say nothing and welcome him into our fold. At the end of the day I do not have to live with him. Anyways, Dana and Kevin arrive in Asia. I have arranged a driver to collect them from the airport and bring them to the house. Due to it being weekend and there being a lot of traffic on the road, their trip from the airport took 4 hours. The moment I met him I understood exactly what my mom was talking about when she said that Kevin was not the sharpest tool in the shed. The guy had no filter, stating that the house was in a boring compound. Not someone who takes a lot of crap from anyone, especially when you are allowing them to use your house, free of charge, stated that if he doesn't like it he can book himself a hotel in town. There is a small restaurant just across the street from the compound, and if you are like me, not in the mood to cook because, you are on holiday, you take advantage of that restaurant being a 5-minute walk away. However, because the path is not lit, you need to take a torch with you just to be on the safe side. You are in Asia, coming across monitor lizards, snakes, both poisonous and non-poisonous, and creepy insects is the norm, and I would rather avoid them. Some of these insects can leave some nasty bites, especially the big-ass centipedes, and you can be hospitalized if bitten by the wrong insect at the wrong time. Dana and I spot this weird-looking thing that looked like a thick blade of grass in the field close to the path. It is not windy, however, it was moving from side to side, and as we got closer to pass it, it moved more erratically. Dana and I got the hint and left a bigger gap, not Kevin. He was highly amused by what he saw and started touching this blade of grass. Having done some research, it looks like a back end of a praying mantis, but can't be sure. It could have just been a blade of grass. I told him not to be an idiot and to leave whatever it is alone. He then decided he wanted to go out looking for monitor lizards and snakes in his shorts and sandals. Me, wondering if he was born without common sense. Walk-on, I can't deal with stupidity and was afraid I would say something I shouldn't, unfortunately, and I suppose luckily, no lessons were learned that day. Anyway, it was my time to leave and go back home to the Middle East. Now, for those who travel internationally know that you should ideally be at the airport 3 hours before the flight is due to depart, allowing you time to check in luggage, and security at that airport is pretty tight, so it can take about 30 to 45 minutes before you are finally through it, plus going through passport control, another 30 to 45 minutes etc. I usually leave the house about 7 hours before the flight is due to depart to allow for unexpected traffic jams plus a pit stop at the halfway mark. I was glad that I did, as there was some road works going on causing a delay and it took me 4.5 hours to get to the airport. I informed Dana and Kevin of this so that they can organize their time accordingly. I usually use the same taxi service when in Asia, and although they charge a little more for their services, their vehicles are always clean and well maintained, so can understand their higher rate. Note, the difference in fare is 5 more than other companies. I offered Kevin that I can book the taxi service for him and Dana to the airport. However, he thought it was too expensive and that he would find someone else to take him and Dana there. On the day of their departure I got a call from Dana stating that they were on their way to the airport. This confused me as they should already be there or at least just arriving, as it was 2 hours before her flight was due to leave. When I asked her when she left, she said half an hour ago. Conversation goes roughly as follows. Me, you left half an hour ago? You are not going to make it to the airport before your flight leaves. Dana, we will be fine. We should get there in an hour or so. Me, no Dana, you will not get there in an hour or so, you may be halfway there by that time but nowhere near the airport. Whose bright idea was it to leave the house 3 hours before the flight is due to depart? Dana, Kevin, he is the one who booked the taxi. Me, sigh, let me speak to Kevin. Kevin, hey, we are on our way to the airport. Me, I know, and you are not going to make it. Kevin, we will be fine. The driver said that he can get us there in time. Me, which would be when, exactly? Kevin, I showed the driver my flight ticket and he said we should leave 3 hours before my flight time. Me, confused, as pretty much all airport drivers know to be at the airport 3 hours before departure. Which company did you use? Kevin, Capital City Taxi. Me, groan, Kevin, first, where the hell did you throw your common sense? I told you that you needed at least 3 hours to get to the airport and warned you that there was road works. Secondly, this guy is not a regular airport driver. He probably doesn't know that you need to be at the airport 3 hours before you depart. He probably doesn't know what an e-ticket looks like and thought you needed to be there for departure time. Last, don't you think that if it took 1.5 hours to get to the airport, it would have taken the same amount of time to have gotten from the airport to the house? Kevin, wait for it, it's not my fault. Yep folks, he actually said that. Me, of course not, Kevin, heaven forbid that you actually have to use your own brains. Put Dana on the phone. Dana, so we are going to miss our flight? Me, yes Dana, you are. You need to call the airline and tell them that you are going to miss your flight and to rebook you and Kevin onto a later one. There will be a charge but not as much as missing the flight and booking a new ticket. I book a lot of travel for my boss, so I'm aware on all that info. Dana, I think we can still make it. Me, oh god, his stupidity is rubbing off on her. Google map your current position to the airport. I hang up trying to nurse a headache. Dana, a few minutes later sends a screenshot of her current position to the airport, stating that they are over 2 hours away from the airport. I think Google Maps is wrong. There is no need to change the flight, we will be fine. Me, of course Dana, both Google Maps and I are completely wrong. Call me when you get to the airport. Over 2 hours later they arrive at the airport, missed their flight and had to buy another ticket. Neither had travel insurance so couldn't try and claim money back for their missed flight. In the end, they had to shell out €800 for 2 one-way tickets from Asia to the Middle East just so that they could save €7 on an airport taxi. Dana and Kevin are now expecting their first baby. I am hoping that she is not going to turn out like Kevin.
Librarian Kevins. The alphabet is just a suggestion. By EgnuCledge. I'm a librarian. I feel like the fact that library books in the fiction section are alphabetized by the author's last name is pretty common knowledge. At least, it should be amongst librarians, but apparently I work with a whole team of Kevins. This morning I was looking for a children's book, Zoe and Sassafras, Grumplets and Pests, by Asia Citro, illustrated by Marion Lindsay. So where would you expect this to be shelved? Not under the author's name. Wasn't under the illustrator, either. Not even under S, in case you're an idiot and thought the author's name was Zoe Sassafras. Nope. It was in the Z's. There's even a little letter C stamped on the top edge of the book so you know where it goes. Of all the possible ways to get this wrong, they chose the wrongest.
My Mother Might Be a Kevina. By brutalbeast. I was once looking for a compact snow shovel that would fit in my car trunk to replace my old one that broke, but was having trouble finding one because it was the end of winter. One day Kevina triumphantly declared she got me one. Says it's in the back seat of her car because it wouldn't fit in her trunk. I said that won't work because I need it to fit in my trunk. She insists it will. I point out we drive identical cars. She still insists my car's trunk is bigger. I say nope, they're the same car, just different colors. She still wants me to see what she bought, so I agree just to humor her. It turns out it's not a shovel, it's a plow. Like what you would use to push snow down a walkway or driveway. She once said during a conversation about travel that she wouldn't want to go to Jamaica because they speak French there. Incidentally, she's lived in a place where the official language is French for 4 decades but speaks none of it. Referred to a Portuguese person as Latino. When I pointed out they're Portuguese, she insisted they're Latino too. Thinks that ADHD is when a child acts out because the parents don't give them enough attention, hence attention deficit. Told me not to cut up my strawberries because they lose their vitamins when you cut them. I was tempted to ask if it's okay to chew them. Is convinced that pushing the preheat button will break the oven. Is convinced that the rehab/physio she sent me to as a child corrected my flat feet. It was a scam, I never had flat feet. Thinks that if you take birth control pills you run the risk of never being able to get pregnant after stopping the BC. I told her all the women who got accidentally pregnant after missing one pill would beg to differ. That's just a few stories off the top of my head, but I might post again if I remember more.
My brother Kevin gets into a staring contest at a train station by MentalLatency. Went on holiday to Amsterdam with my brother, the Kevin of this story. We were waiting at a train station when I noticed he'd gone quiet. When I asked him what was wrong, he said a creepy guy behind me had been staring at him for about 5 minutes. I turn around and see the guy staring at us. I look down, and notice he's holding a white cane with a ball on the end. Me, Kevin, he's blind. Look at his cane. Kevin, no, he's definitely not, he's staring right at me. The train arrives and the guy starts to walk towards the platform, using his cane to guide him. My brother had gotten into a 5-minute stare-off with a blind guy. Edited to correct spelling errors.
Kevina and Kevin, Soulmates by WatchGirlfriend. One of my former co-workers is a Kevina. She's one of the sweetest, hardest working girls I've ever met, but is somewhat lacking in street smarts, common sense. For a while she dated a Kevin. This story will show why they were so perfect for each other and why I was terrified they might one day produce offspring. I tried to save money by bringing a packed lunch to work every day. Kevina was always impressed by this because she couldn't cook. She also claimed that cooking was more expensive than eating out and wanted to know how often I had to buy pots and pans. As it turns out, every time Kevina tried to cook something, she would burn the food so badly that it would congeal and stick to the pan in hardened black lumps. Instead of washing the pan, she assumed it was ruined and would throw it away. For years she'd been throwing away her pots/pans and buying new ones each time she tried to cook something. This cycle finally ended when she tried to cook dinner for her boyfriend, Kevin. He blew her mind when he told her that she could fix her pots/pans by washing them. As for Kevin, whenever he bought suits he would wear them repeatedly until they were too dirty to wear anymore. Then he would throw them away and go buy new ones to start the process over again. You're probably wondering why. Hint, it's not because he's super rich and has money to waste. It's because the care labels all said dry clean only. Kevin was completely stumped by this. He didn't know what dry clean only meant and never bothered to find out. After Kevina and Kevin started cohabitating, Kevina asked him to pick up some of her clothes from the dry cleaners while he was out. That's how Kevin learned what a dry cleaners is. Kevin's mind was blown when he realized he could launder and re-wear his suits instead of throwing them away. They learned so much from each other. Part of me was sad when they broke up, but a bigger part of me was relieved.
My brother is a Kevin by Zeldaspellfactory. My older brother is an idiot. I refer to him as my idiot brother. Sadly, he is my only brother. Many years ago, when he was a senior in high school, we had a dog. Idiot bro decided if it was good enough for his dog, it was good enough for him. He was the one responsible for cleaning the dog's dishes, which he didn't do. I know because I ended up doing it to keep the dog healthy. One day idiot bro calls me into his room because he wants to ask a private question. I was worried the moment he said it was private. He wanted to know what to do if you saw something moving on the toilet paper after you went to the bathroom. I told him to go to a doctor because that was bad. So he made an appointment and saw his doctor. Apparently he was drinking out of the dog's water dish if he was in the backyard, and he got worms from the dog. There is a type of worm in our area that is almost impossible to kill in the soil, so dogs get wormed regularly. Here. Our dog got wormed often, but apparently not often enough. By the time idiot bro got home, he was in bad shape and couldn't go get his medication. So he gave me some cash for it. Then I had to go to the local veterinary school to get the medication. Human pharmacies didn't carry this med because it was specific to this one type of worm. The lady at the vet school was dumbfounded when she figured out I needed it for my brother, not for a dog. Imagine the laughter when I had to go back 2 more times, each a few months apart, because he kept getting the same worms again. The dog did get wormed each time, but as the worms live in the dirt around here, she kept getting infected. If only this was the dumbest thing he ever did.
My encounter with Steve by BewBewsBoutique. I deadass swear this is real. About a year or so ago, I met a guy at a party named Steve. After a bit I started hooking up with him at his place. This wasn't the greatest of my decisions. He was well-meaning but a little tone-deaf to situations, and he was also not the most age-appropriate for me. But hey, I make lots of bad decisions and this wasn't the worst of them. Third time I went over to his place, we were having a conversation, then I paused to go to the bathroom. When I came out, I started to take up the conversation again when Steve interrupted me. I have something to tell you. What? My name isn't Steve. What? It's Kevin. Are you for real? Yes, my name is Kevin. Why had he introduced himself to me and many others as Steve? Because he was going through a divorce but wasn't divorced yet and was worried someone would find out he was partying and it would affect his divorce proceedings. So he decided to become Steve. What the fuck, Kevin?
My Dad Kevin's Idiotic Statements. By IAbstainFromSociety. My dad doesn't like me. Has been up and down until he started catcalling 16-year-olds for me and making masturbation jokes in public loudly, so I don't see him much anymore. This isn't really relevant, so here are his dumb opinions/fact denial. He is in school to be a counselor, and says he has a 148 IQ. Cancer and most modern diseases didn't exist at all back in the 1800s, and it's GMOs and processed food that causes it, and nothing else. Any amount of alcohol will cause irreparable liver damage, even responsible drinking. MLMs are good as long as you're a good salesman, and anyone who is will make millions a month, regardless of where you are in the pyramid. You can choose engines in space, even ones that work without oxygen, because the vacuum is negative and will therefore suck all the thrust out and negate it. He used the justification of a light not working in a vacuum. As such, the moon landing described by him was, scientists did enough math to basically fire a shot out of the atmosphere and hit the moon. Going to Chernobyl is a death sentence, because of all the radiation. As such, he thinks Terry's no safe level of radiation. Wait till he learns about background radiation. Radio towers will kill you, because of all the radiation. He didn't want to hear the difference between ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. He used the example of a microwave cooking things to justify radio towers causing damage. I told him the difference in intensity, he wouldn't listen. He also thinks solar panels are crap, couldn't figure out why, and nuclear is the only way to go. Even though he thinks that there's no safe level of radiation, according to him. You can't lose weight without exercise in any way. Even though I've lost 30 pounds by not eating like crap. Being gay/bi/lesbian/trans/anything but heterosexual is a choice and bad. As such, I'm asexual, and he thinks he'll never be happy without a girlfriend and a sex life. Even though him stunted and can't go through puberty. And as such, makes indirect death threats to anyone my 11-year-old sister would date, even though she's never dated. Edit, forgot one. In the space conversation, he said warp drives are the only propulsion method in space, so I said Alcubierre drive are a real concept. He told me that was a car part.
I Think My Husband Is a Kevin Frown by clevahgeul. After reading and enjoying many of these stories, I came to a rather shocking realization. I think my husband is a Kevin. He's a pretty smart guy in some ways, so it sneaks up on you, but he'll say things sometimes that just blow your mind with their absurdity. When his sister had a baby, he was riding with her and her family in their car to a day at the beach. They had to stop a few times for nursing, and he said, "Can't you just nurse him while we're driving?" She was in the front passenger seat. A few months after we had our first child, I was going out with friends for the evening, once our daughter fell asleep in her crib for the night. He typically went for a jog most nights back then, and before I left, he asked me if he could still go on his jog, leaving our daughter in her crib in the house. At least he asked first, so I could verbally smack that nonsense out his head. Remember that episode in the final season of Parks and Rec that was styled like a Johnny Karate episode, and there were fake commercials included, based on Pawnee businesses? As we watched that episode, it got the second commercial break before my husband realized that they were a part of the show and not real commercials. We were watching it on Netflix. We were sitting in a waiting room with a television playing an NCIS spin-off. One of the characters was an older lady with a short bob and glasses. My husband piped up, "Hey, isn't that the same actress who was in The Incredibles?" He was referring to Edna Mode, the animated character. I don't even know how to respond when he says stuff like this.
Kevin was one of the nicest girls I ever knew. By Sparkpulse. I knew a female Kevin once. Growing up in a small town where the standards weren't high, I found myself working with her when my sister got me a job at her big box home improvement store. Kevin was one of our co-workers, and I had been forewarned that she was nice, but a bit dumb. Knowing my small town like I thought I did, I just shrugged that off with a yeah, sure, how bad can she be? Oh, boy. Let's see, where to begin. How about with the dress code? Kevin constantly wore pants that were fine when she stood up. But when she bent over they rode down, and one could clearly see what color thon underwear she was wearing that day. This was, of course, not allowed, and lead to many soft murmurs of "Kevin, you need to wear different pants. You're going to get into trouble with those, your underwear are showing again." Kevin would get a confused look on her face, stand up, and twist to check behind her. "But I can't see them at all," she would say. We tried to explain that they showed when she bent over, but she would just keep twisting about, still standing up. "But I can't see them at all. Kevin, you need to bend over. You're wearing blue with flowers today." "Oh wow, how do you know? I can't see them at all." Even after she did, in fact, get into trouble with management a few times, she just couldn't understand our explanations of how her pants were a problem. Kevin couldn't follow a basic conversation, even when she was, following a basic conversation. I remember one incident in particular, where she and I were sitting in the break room having lunch together, and two of our male co-workers were discussing the value of the dollar and how expensive things were these days. I actually really enjoyed eating lunch with Kevin because she was one of those rare people that you could talk to, and if the conversation lapsed into silence, you could still be comfortable. She was so warm and friendly that it made it nice just to sit in her company. In fact, sometimes the silences were nicer. I suppose nature had to give her something to compensate for her being dumb as a post. Anyway, she and I had fallen into one of those silences, and instead were listening to our two male co-workers as they started discussing what you could still buy for $5. A value meal at a fast food joint, a clearance DVD at a big box retailer, and so forth, and so on. Getting a little raunchy, One of them joked, a really, really cheap hooker? And the other brightened and went, Kevin. Kevin, who had been sitting there actively listening to the conversation, blinked and went, what? They started laughing hysterically until they realized I had my "I will maim you" look going, and then both immediately shut up and looked down at their lunches. Kevin looked at me, blinked at my expression, and seemed even more confused. It went right over her head. I still don't get how. She was just clueless. And this was something that happened often. Anytime a joke wasn't about as blunt as a 2x4 to the face, she didn't get it and it would have to be explained. We knew Kevin's confused face well. Likewise, Kevin was confused by stories that took more than 3 minutes to tell, semi-complicated movie plots, and the nightly news. God forbid someone left a newspaper in the break room. She tried, guys, she really did. One of my sister's favorite stories to tell was about Kevin and religion. Kevin was deeply Christian. The kind of devout Christian you want to see, who is good and helpful and charitable, and doesn't judge, and sees God as a beautiful warm light in her life and not something to ever be afraid of. In fact, God was such a beautiful, warm light in her life that to Kevin, God was a very real thing that could be felt every day, making her world brighter and more fair. God's love was all but tangible to her. She couldn't touch it, but she could feel it. Like seriously, she was fucking inspirational, okay? Every person of every religion should feel like Kevin did about their faith. The world would be a better place. And if you were another faith, Muslim or Jewish or whatnot, that was fine. Kevin just sort of assumed that your religion did for you what hers did for her. Even if it was weird to her. But my sister? My sister outright confused her. See, my sister had gone to church as a child, only to leave it and convert to being pagan in her late teens. And this made her the only person Kevin knew at that time who had left God to go to some other belief. And that was more than she could comprehend. But it did not stop her from trying. So Kevin used to ask my sister about it. A lot. About what made her leave the church, because heavens forbid. About why she believed in different things now, and what those things meant to her. About how, didn't she miss that big, warm presence in her life? Because to Kevin, my sister had essentially turned off that big, warm light. Kevin didn't understand that not everybody could feel the big warmth, and so she thought that my sister had cut that out and left a big, dark, empty hole where it was supposed to be. That was how it felt to Kevin when she tried to imagine not feeling the big warmth every day. And that was so confusing that apparently at one point, during one of these talks, she all but started crying and finally confessed, "I just can't understand how you can live without God's love anymore." Finally my sister sighed and looked at her and said something to the effect of, "Kevin, I have very difficult periods, and sometimes I just didn't feel like praying to a male god worked because he can't relate. I have a much easier time praying to a mother goddess about female issues." Kevin was confused at first. God isn't a he, he's everything, and my sister patiently pointed out that no, in most if not all scripture, God is referred to as he. He is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. He's pretty dude. Kevin's eyes got wide and apparently she went oh. The way a small child does when they grasp some sort of information that they're startled by. But she was 100% accepting that yes, my sister had converted because her period sucked and not for the 1,000 other reasons she had tried explaining in the past. And she never asked about it again. She really was the sweetest girl ever. But good lord. Kevin was one of the few cashiers I had ever met who needed a calculator with her at the register. I never wanted to know why and I did a pretty good job of not asking, but that didn't stop me from hearing her ask one day, when somebody wanted change for a 20, just how many 5s and 1s that would take. And not in the okay, how do you want this broken up? Way. In the okay, if you want 2 5s, that's. How many 1s is that? Way. Kevin. Sweetie. You should have learned that line before entering the workforce. Working with Kevin was like working with a small child. The sweetest, most innocent child, whom you have to watch discreetly to make sure they're not messing things up. She was a good, hard worker, she was just a bit bad at it. She was a kind, gentle girl, she just didn't understand a lot of basic conversational skills. Honestly, I've been out of touch with her for years, but I've always wished her nothing but the best. I hope she found the husband of her dreams, she talked about it a couple times, and has a bunch of children, and is basking in all the love and warmth in the world. I hope that her family and friends see how precious she is and that they all treat her as the beautiful human being that she truly is at heart. But I also hope that her husband puts padding on all the edges of the furniture, because if her kids take after her, lordy. I miss Kevin sometimes.
Kevin has loudmouth got me off of a job. By thinkpinkhair. On mobile, and English is first language. I work in construction, so my job is essential. I was on a site which I really liked and a friend and I were bullshitting before our safety meeting when Kevina came to ask her question. Kevina, whose is going to be pushing the button tonight? A job reserved for you when you fucked up so badly they put there because they have no real work for you and you pissed away any hope of work for yourself. Kevina was on this job often. I did it for a week and learned my lesson. The job was waiting for trucks, watch them come up to the light, then you push a button to make the traffic stop for the trucks. Maybe you, I don't care. I turned away from her until I heard. Kevina, did you hear? Our site might be shut down, do you think ours will be? My friend walked away knowing she couldn't handle Kevina any farther. Kevina, we won't be shut down, excuse me. And walked away from her. A few days later I was out of a job and I thought it was because COVID-19 shut down our site. Bullshit, no, it was Kevina. She went to our company and told them how COVID-19 practices weren't being followed, she just didn't want to work, I dunno. To which the company who hired us for this job only let all of us go on a 2-week unpaid holiday. I was livid when I found it was Kevina. She went to another site to explain why we got shut down, and the lead hand got mad saying, well, why are you here if you are sick? She said I need to work and I don't have symptoms. No shit, Kevina, no one did because no one was sick, but you had to open your mouth.
Kevins are hitting the slopes. By luckyzacky. Before I share some stories, I should lay some foundation. I worked at a ski hill in Canada for about 7 years as a chairlift operator. A fancy title for someone who was just there to make sure the ski lift was running and to do his best to prevent suicide or manslaughter by stupidity. For those who have never experienced temperatures below 40°C, I should also explain snowboarding and skiing. The sport is effectively zip tying planks to your feet, go down a hill and try not to die. You can also spice it up by doing jumps and tricks. As sports, skiing and snowboard don't require much physical fitness. I've seen people in their 90s go faster on slopes than highways. Or brains. I've seen many children not old enough to write their names able to ski backwards. No. What is required is courage. I've been on hills so steep the only thing preventing tumbling to my death was my ability to maintain Mach 1. Otherwise there wouldn't be enough force to keep my board on terra firma. So, a sport that requires more balls than brains is a fertile ground for Kevins. Here are some of their stories. Safety is for the sober. Kevin 1 gets drunk. Kevin 1 goes up the chairlift. Kevin 1 does not put the safety bar down. Several meters from the top of the hill he passes out and falls down several stories. A mere mortal would have hoped for death because at that height you would be likely to end up in a wheelchair for life. But this drunk Kevin might as well be Gumby himself. The only reason he didn't walk away was that he was too drunk to walk. Colorblind Kevins, working at a ski hill for so long you start seeing Kevin patterns. I discovered they are like deer and cannot see neon orange. You see, all our barriers were neon orange and Kevins could not see them, so they always went around them. Kevin 2 was approaching the chairlift. Ignored the neon orange line and a sign that said wait here. He then stopped to wait his turn, leaned onto his ski poles and turned to Kevin 3 to chat. When the steel chair support struck his head, the sound of an empty rain barrel rang out and all believed that he suffered permanent brain damage. However, this is Kevin. Any damage would have been impossible to notice. The medical staff figured it was a minor concussion at worst. His perpetual dazed look was simply his brain trying to comprehend actions have consequences. Camel Kevin, Kevin 4 and Kevin 5 are going on the chairlift. They decide making the lift bounce sounds like a good idea. However, behind them is a young girl and the bouncing is making her slip under the bar. By the time they all reach the top, the girl is hanging on for dear life, Mission Impossible style. Focused on making sure the girl is safe, the lifty at the top makes a mental note of what they look like. He then contacted me at the bottom of the hill to catch them before they try to go back up. The discernible feature I'm looking for? A bright neon orange one-piece suit. A lighthouse on fire would have been more subtle. But since Kevins are blind to neon orange, I'm convinced he thought he was John Cena. They beelined it to the chalet, but I knew they were just waiting for the heat to die down and that they were going to try the other lift. We only had 2/3 running. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later I see them heading out. I get my co-worker to cover for me and I pull them out of the line. I tore them a new one for about 10 minutes, every minute contemplating if I should just accept a fate in prison, knowing the world would be a safer place without Kevins 4 and 5. My power trip ended when my boss came and threw them out. All he told me was to call him next time. That's it for the stories for now. If there's enough interest, I'll share some more in the future. To get ahead of some questions, I should clear something up. Me reprimanding customers was nothing new. Safety being so important on the slopes, I was given a long leash. For those who might think Kevin once survived because of soft snow, think again. This was groomed snow compacted so that it feels like a brick wall when you fall on it from a standing position. Edit, Part 2 is live, folks. Part 3.
Kevin can do his own math, he can't even put in a Wendy's order correctly. By Daniel 90751. Hey guys, first time poster, long time reading stories about Kevins. Edit, thank you for all those in reading this story. I honestly wish I can say that this didn't happen and the entire time it did happen. I was dying on the inside, so no, I'm nowhere near like this Kevin, and I've stopped talking to him due to other recent events. Also, I made this post on my B-Day during a different class, but thank you for all the likes and comments. I didn't think it would get this far. I was expecting 6 or 7 upvotes, but I'm glad that it's liked by many. Thank you for reading. I'm currently in summer college math classes so that I can get ahead for my degree, computer engineering, if anyone's curious, and I believe I meet whom I think is the biggest Kevin I have ever met. 2 stories. In class, Kevin would do the work needed to be done, but the format would always be wrong. This teacher required certain work to be shown, and in my opinion, showing your work isn't that big of a deal, and it wasn't much that she wanted. It's just basic show your work so that the teacher can see how you got your answer. Pretty simple idea, right? Well, not for this guy. Time and time again during class, Kevin would not do any of his own work and instead have her TA help him almost every time. Then when the teacher says, hey, insert TA name here, don't help him because I want to see what part he gets stuck at so that I can help him. Mind you, this teacher actually does enjoy her job and does care about students succeeding, but Kevin didn't see it that way, and instead of talking to the TA, he would talk to the students and him for the answers or for them to explain to him how to do the math. On top of that, he was my ride home since I took the bus, and he offered to take me home. But let me tell one more quick story. Class finished and we wanted to get something to eat, and me, not having that much money due to me trying to find a new job, suggested my girl Wendy's. So we pull into the drive-through line and started to wait in line to place our order. Kevin and I had a conversation about something. I don't really remember what we were talking about, but we finally got to the drive-through order machine. I think everyone knows the rule about Drive Thursday. 1. Wait for the person that has to take your order to start the conversation. 2. Follow the line. 3. Don't be a dick. Pretty simple rules, I think, but not for Kevin. He says my order without her starting the conversation and pulls forward. I said, Kevin, why did you pull forward? Kevin, don't we bro, they got my order and they were taking too long. They shouldn't have people wait this long for a fast food restaurant. Note, this Wendy's always had a help wanted sign, so no, they aren't fully staffed as other fast food places. Me, that's not how any of this works. Kevin, don't worry about it, they will take my order over at the window. Me, whatever man, we can go back now, so I guess it's too late. We pull up to the window and the lady that worked the drive-thru told him, why did you move forward without ordering? Kevin, you took too long to take my order, so I said it out loud and moved forward. Me, ma'am, I'm sorry about my friend, it was an accident and he didn't mean to move forward, but he did on accident. The lady seemed to only pay attention to me after that instead of Kevin. Luckily the lady was nice enough for me to place my order, $444, and got my food ready fast. I paid for my food and we drove off. Kevin then says, dude, why did you apologize? You know they don't get paid enough to actually care about their job, right? Me, that's not the point. The point is that you don't follow the rules. There are rules for a reason so that things work in a certain way. I've worked at many restaurants. Customers aren't above the rules/system. And second, why couldn't you have just waited for the lady to take the e-order? Kevin, I don't apologize to anyone, trying to be a badass. I guess, I really don't know, and you have to stop apologizing so much. Stand up for yourself and realize that you aren't gonna tolerate their BS. Yep. I think this is definitely a Kevin.
Stuck on an Island with a Kevina by Sibai_she_69. Some time ago I was in an organization teaching English abroad. When we were told which parts of the country we'd be sent off to, I was chosen to be with the Kevina of the group on a tiny island in the middle of nowhere. Shit. Here are some short stories about working with a Kevina. Apologies for the length, some of them require a bit of context to help you understand her shenanigans. Part 1, Training, or lack thereof. 1. Kevina can't pay attention. She's a space cadet and can't focus on anything more than a few minutes. When you call her name she says, huh? If you're telling a story among friends, a conversation she is part of, and you mention her name in the story she says, huh? More than a few times I'd been telling her something and watched her face go blank as she tuned out from the world. During training we read some pamphlets and worksheets as a group. We would do popcorn reading where one person reads a paragraph or two and then selects who will read next. When I read passages I would always choose Kevina to read next, huh? And each time she was in a daze and on the wrong page. I got called out by others for being mean, but if you're being funded to do work abroad, thanks to your tax dollars, you should probably not have your head up your ass. Just a thought. 2. Kevina can't stay awake. Every Monday to Friday we had teacher training in the morning and language classes in the afternoon. During our language class we'd get a 5-minute break and Kevina would be asleep on the dirty cement floor when we got back, officially useless the rest of the day. This was routine. When asked why she was so tired all of the time she said she woke up every morning to work out on the road outside her house from 3 a.m. until sunrise. Along a span of 30 feet back and forth she'd do some jogging, side steps, and high knees, basically a sports warm-up. How you make a 3-hour workout of that is beyond me. To no one's surprise, she wasn't very good at speaking the language. 3. Kevina is cultured. During training we stayed with a local host family for 3 months. This was before we would be assigned to our permanent site for the next 2 years to do our job. Toward the end of training we had one session about how immersed we felt in our community and rated ourselves 1 through 5 how we felt. A 1 meant you knew little about the culture/language and don't feel part of it at all, and a 5 meant you feel so integrated that you're basically another local. We all felt quite detached from the community because we were leaving in a week and we had been studying a new language. Most rated themselves a 2 and a few said 1. Kevina rated herself a 5. Part 2, At Sight. 1. Kevina goes stargazing. If you haven't seen a night sky in the remotest of remote locations, you really should. You can see the stars so clearly that you can see them twinkling red and blue. I pointed out a twinkling star to Kevina one night and she disagreed and insisted it was an airplane. When I pointed out more of them and that the first star had not moved after a while, she then said they're stationary satellites. Not satellites that orbit at the same rate as the Earth's rotation, but satellites that just sit there. 2. Kevina understands local customs. The culture we lived in has a core belief in sharing everything. Everyone asks each other for things and is expected to share. It's frowned upon to be stingy, but wise folk know not to flaunt their valued possessions or else people will ask you for them and run you dry. A hot commodity is tobacco, sometimes for smoking but usually for mixing with betel nut, a local drug. Cigarettes cost about $5 a pack and the average wage is $1.50 per hour. When Kevina started smoking she walked around the village with cigarettes tucked into her dreadlocks, one behind each ear, and smoking one at the same time. She complained about people always asking to bum cigarettes. 3. Kevina forgets protocol. Our organization was very strict on water safety. We had a strict training about safety because deaths at sea is the #1 cause of death in the organization, so don't fuck it up. If we're caught not following the rules, we're instantly fired. We each were issued a satellite phone, life jacket, and locator beacon, sends an SOS signal if stranded at sea, and had to have them at all times when on a boat. We each signed our name to assume responsibility for them. One day we went on a trip to another island. I was at the beach about to call my boss to report I was going out when I realized I didn't have my locator beacon with me. Kevina approaches, so I asked if by chance she packed her locator beacon. She didn't understand. You know, the neon yellow thing that sends a distress signal if we're stranded. Nope. Never heard of it. I begrudgingly went home to retrieve mine and showed it to her. She claims she's never seen it before in her life and admin must have dropped the ball by never giving her one. We had about 1 month left in our 2-year assignment then. 4. Kevina does group therapy. A really bad typhoon hit our island unfortunately. Myself, Kevina, and a few others were evacuated to the mainland days before it arrived. It was refreshing to be on the mainland and we enjoyed burgers, beers, and comfort until we saw the storm picked up to 160 miles per hour and was headed straight for our islands with poor infrastructure and limited resources. We were hit with guilt for living in luxury while our community's lives were in danger. The day before the storm hit was a stressful time and we were feeling very sad and scared, so we had a group session to talk and be there for one another. To start it off, we talked about ground rules like respect others' opinions, don't interrupt, and so on. During this, Kevina does a white shroot and blurts out question. What if you don't feel anything? Catastrophic events affect people in different ways and I think she just didn't know how to process the way she was feeling, but her poor choice of words was not well received by the group and stirred up some drama. 5. Kevina gets an apartment. Kevina stayed in an apartment on the mainland for a short time on the mainland. Around when she was leaving, I got a bad infection in my toe that spread, so I had to be flown to the mainland hospital. I needed a temporary place to stay, so I just took over the apartment. She moved out before I showed up, but it looked like she had just went out for the day and decided not to come back. She left the air conditioner on for over a week. Over there they burn diesel fuel to power their generators. Terrible, I know, and electricity costs $6 per kilowatt. I'll let r/they did the math calculate the cost of that mistake. The apartment reeked of cigarettes, though the apartments were non-smoking and there are really nice front and back balconies. She denies having smoked in the apartment. Maybe she was being honest and the lone culprit for the smell was the extra large glass salad bowl nearly filled to the brim with cigarette butts on the kitchen counter. She not only left cigarette butts, she left behind dirty sheets on the bed, a few clothes, some random items, and an Amazon package containing an expensive portable speaker. I saw the invoice inside and the cost of shipping was almost as much as the speaker itself. In my own Kevin moment, I left the back balcony door unlocked and somebody stole it. Kevina never remembered it and I kept my mouth shut. I wanted pasta my first night. Dirty dishes were left in the sink and there was no sponge in sight, until I saw from my angle a sponge sitting atop the bathroom sink. Considering it my lucky day, I grabbed the sponge and ran it under the water in the kitchen sink, only to realize both my hands and the dishes were covered in tiny prickly hairs. She left her body hair shavings scrub for me to discover and they were not easy to remove. I think I'll end it here as this post is already quite long. I have other stories, including one where Kevina tries to start beef with me if you're interested.
Kevin and Physics by JoeyJoeJoeJuniorShab. Weirdly, I stumbled onto this sub and instantly had to share a Kevin story because this guy's name is really Kevin. So 20 years ago, my buddy, 16, is working at a gas station with Kevin, 28, and it got boring a lot of the time, so they talked to pass time. One day, Kevin says that glass bottle that is filled with something cannot break because the physics of it mean that the material inside will keep the integrity of the glass sound. My buddy said, That's not how it works. So days later, Kevin has a bottle of wine and my buddy tells him to put his theory to the test. Kevin, the physics PhD, promptly and gladly stands up and casually extends his arm out, bottle in hand, and lets gravity do its thing. The bottle broke, naturally, and Kevin was faced with the realization he was not the genius physicist he claimed.
We need to talk about Kevina by Jiminy 4792. A couple of years ago, my partner and I moved in with a friend and her housemate Kevina. Stories of this Kevina's Kevinosity were already pretty legendary within our group before we moved in, but there was something about her newfound proximity to her actions and decision-making process that really nailed home her Kevina status. Here are a few of the highlights. We live in Australia, where voting in elections is mandatory. Prior to a state election, Kevina was adamant that she had changed her address from her old address in a different city a few hundred kilometers away to their new address. Our other housemate had not done this, but this was fine as you were able to vote in absentia at your local polling booth and have this vote counted in your home electorate. At the polling booth, Kevina told the person marking names off that she needed to vote locally, but he could not find her name on the list. Kevina made him check again, but to no avail. Both Kevina and our other housemate were directed to the desk to vote in a different electorate. Kevina made the person at this desk check again to make sure she was not on the list. This patient electoral worker checked again, and informed Kevina that she was not on the list for this electorate, and that she would have to vote in absentia for her old electorate. At this moment, panic and anger have stricken Kevina's face. Her voicing rising in pitch and volume, she exclaimed to the electoral worker, "But I can't make it to old electorate / today." Our other housemate didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or slap her. A lot of these relate to her questionable habits with food. Kevina was a big ice cream fan, and was one day complaining to our other housemate that the spoon she was using to get her ice cream out of the tub was bending from her exertions. My housemate suggested she pour hot water over it so it might be able to cut through the ice cream more easily. Kevina misunderstood the instruction, boiled the kettle, and proceeded to pour a liter of boiling water directly into the tub of ice cream. A few weeks later she did a very similar thing with a frozen lasagna. Kevina came back from an organic grocer one day raving about this new milk she was excited about trying. When pressed about what made the milk new, she said it was less processed, and therefore better for you than regular milk. It turns out that the element of processing that had been removed from this milk was pasteurization. Kevina had bought non-pasteurized milk, which can technically only be sold in stores in Australia as a bath milk, with the intention of drinking it. Try as we may, we could not explain to her the benefits of the pasteurization process, and why it might be necessary before the milk was bottled, and then transferred from God knows how far away to a supermarket, however many days ago. My partner came home one day to find Kevina sitting in front of a 1-meter-long pizza. She explained she had been very hungry, and so ordered the largest size, which had cost her in excess of $35. She wasn't on great money at the time, and seemed a little bit bummed out about the amount of money she had spent on dinner. So my partner consoled her saying that there was so much food that she would probably be able to get another few meals out of the pizza, reducing the cost per meal overall. About 40 to 45 minutes later, my partner walked back through where Kevina was eating to find her sweating, laboring for breath, forcing herself to eat the last piece of pizza, despite telling my partner she did not want to eat the pizza anymore. My partner suggested that she could still save the rest for later, but Kevina explained that she could not, as she had measured and the box would not fit in the fridge. Kevina went to Samoa with her now fiancé for a holiday, and neglected to clean out her shelf, the top one, in the fridge before she left. Kevina often cooked frozen whiting fillets using the microwave, which routinely stank the house out and annoyed everyone else. Until she went to Samoa, we did not realize Kevina had been keeping the fillets in the fridge, slowly defrosting. We were made aware of this when the stinky fish juice of her until recently frozen whiting fillets began to leak through the whole fridge. Kevina was notoriously thrifty, particularly towards the end of her tenancy. This was not a problem, and was sensible of her given her financial situation, but due to being a Kevina it was often expressed in very odd ways. The most notable of these was her taking all but 2 rolls of toilet paper with her when she moved out, as she had last bought it. She had no engagement with the concept of toilet paper being a communal expense, and saw no connection between this lot of toilet paper, the last lot that we had bought, or the one before that our other housemate had bought. When it finally came time for Kevina to move out, we did an inspection of her room to figure out its state, as she was very pushy about the time frame in which she would get her bond back. Upon inspection, we found that her walls were covered, floor to ceiling in mold. At various times she had remarked that she didn't like having her window open as she didn't like the smell of fresh air, but I guess we didn't really know how bad it had gotten in there. There was also 6 divots in the hardwood floor. Not just scrapes or scuffs, full chunks ground out of the floor. We couldn't explain it initially, until we saw her bed leaned up against the wall outside her room, with 6 metal casters that matched the spacing of the divots. Kevina and her partner are both on the larger side, and both the divots and the mold seem to be the aftermath of the sustained presence of 250-ish kgs of hot, sweaty love. When questioned on the divots, Kevina denied she had caused them and claimed they were there when she moved in. When we told Kevina that she would need to clean the mold in her room or forfeit part of her bond for it to be professionally cleaned, she was not best pleased, but the miser in her won out and she decided to do it herself. She disappeared to Bunnings for half an hour, and came back with a ton of bleach, wearing a dust mask, and eye mask, and a disposable plastic suit that covered all of her from neck to wrists to ankles. She looked like Walter White. The flaws in Kevina's plan became clear pretty quickly. The eye protection she had bought had holes at the side for ventilation, rendering them pretty much useless against the bleach. The dust masks were not particularly helpful either, and she still was not that keen on the smell of fresh air, meaning she had the window and door closed like some sort of noxious hotbox. The cherry on top of this was that she was working on ladder, directly below what she was scrubbing, meaning that the bleach and mold were immediately settling back on her. At various stages she exited the room to cough her lungs up, face red, eyes red, and hair full of chunks of mold. Bit of a long one, but I think that's the vast majority of the memorable stories that involved her. Now she has a kid, and I am really starting to question my belief in natural selection. Oh well, the best of luck to the family, Kevin. I hope none of them walk past any uncovered manholes.
Kevin demonstrates Newton's first law of physics by Hugo_first. When this occurred, Kevin lived in a condo complex. Residents of the complex were assigned one parking spot, one per address, that was covered by a freestanding awning. They were also allowed to park one additional vehicle in the uncovered parking area. Most of the time, Kevin's wife used the covered parking spot and Kevin parked his truck in an uncovered spot. However, on this day, Kevin's wife and their child are out of state visiting Kevin's mother-in-law. As a result, Kevin has opted to move her minivan to an uncovered spot and park his truck in their covered spot. Kevin has asked to go with him to shop for a new car stereo and was waiting outside when I arrived. We got into his truck and after he started it and put it into reverse, I suggested he close his door. He looked at me grinning and said, "Watch this." I think he tried to wink but he did so with both eyes so it looked more like a nervous twitch. Kevin popped the clutch and the truck lurched backwards. The still open driver door caught the support of the covered parking and bent forward. Kevin later explained that he had previously done this maneuver when parked in one of the uncovered spots. He would back up and then put the truck in first and the inertia would cause his door to close. Well, his door wouldn't close now. We couldn't get it anywhere close to closing. He almost ripped his armrest off trying to pull it closed while I pushed from the outside. Format corrected by popular demand.
Engineer Kevin strikes again by qrpc. Our office used to have an extra large cubicle with a conference table and microwave that functioned as a break room until our, also somewhat Kevinish, boss had it removed. He asked what will higher-ups think seeing people just hanging out there eating? We pointed out that if you come to our floor at 12:15 and happen to find your way through the maze of cubicles and files to this one area where you see some guys around a table eating sandwiches, you will probably think they are having lunch, but the boss was convinced it looked bad and it had to go. With our break room gone, the microwave moved into a little alcove just down the hall from my cubicle. Now my section got to enjoy the smell of what everyone else was having for lunch. Yay. While that was bad, it was at least tolerable until Kevin the engineer had an idea. Kevin was very thrifty, see prior story, and would do almost anything to find free food, but also kept some food in the refrigerator in case he had no other choice. One of his emergency rations was a container of boiled cauliflower that was in the refrigerator so long it spoiled. Rather than throw it out, Kevin figured that if he microwaved it, that would kill all the bacteria and make it safe to eat again. Kevin was run. Being Kevin, he didn't just put it in for 30 seconds and sniff it to see if the microwave had an effect. He set the timer for something like 5 minutes, then walked away to do something else while it cooked. It wasn't long before the smell of hot-rotten cauliflower permeated the entire floor, winning Kevin many new friends. That idea didn't save him any money either. Since he couldn't quite get the stink cleaned out of the microwave, he ended up buying the office a new one. /edit, Kevin did taste it just to be sure it was bad, but he didn't actually eat any /.
Kevin doesn't understand paying for something you like by Sentryy. Back when I was fulfilling my military service, the army bases were basically physical manifestations of BitTorrent servers, at least here in Germany. There were officers whose printers would run day and night printing covers of pirated DVDs. You could get anything pirated. The Kevin of this story was another guy serving his mandatory military service and had good connections and could get you anything. We were talking about what kind of music we like, and I mentioned that my favorite band had just released a new album. I can't wait to get to the store this weekend and buy that album. I've been looking forward to that release for months. Kevin: hey, I can get you that for free, if you want. Thanks, but no. I really like that band, I'll gladly pay for it. Kevin: but I can get it for you for free. I know, but I want to support the artist. At this point you could see the wheels turning inside his head, but I guess they were not connected. Kevin, with a very confused look on his face: but you could get it for free. I know, but I want to buy it. Kevin just stares at me for a few seconds. Kevin: but you can get it for free? Seriously? Really appreciate it, but no thanks, bro. I start talking to someone else at that point. 10 minutes later, when I got up to get back to my room, Kevin stopped me. Kevin: dude, I can really get that for you for free. You gotta believe me. I walk away and can still hear him muttering, but, you can get it for free? Edit, spelling.